The rain had long ceased, leaving the sprawling metropolis of New York shimmering beneath a cloak of moonlight, a breathtaking, indifferent spectacle visible from the commanding heights of Julian Thorne's penthouse office, 87 floors above the street, in a space that was the very embodiment of absolute control and unassailable success. Julian felt a hollow ache that even the filtered, temperature-controlled air could not dispel. Thorne Enterprises was more than just a corporation. It was a monument to his relentless drive, a fortress he had built around himself, brick by calculated brick, insulating him from a world he found both fascinating and fundamentally untrustworthy. He was a titan of industry, a name synonymous with innovation and strategic brilliance, his decisions reverberating through global markets. He commanded respect, inspired awe, and, in certain circles, instilled a chilling fear. Yet, in the quiet hours after the last deal was sealed and the last encrypted communication sent, when the city lights seemed to mock his solitude with their cold, distant sparkle, the familiar, persistent ache settled deep in his chest. A void, vast and cold, that no amount of wealth, power, or success could ever truly fill. It had been 5 years, 2 months, and 19 days since Isabella Rossi had walked out of his life. He knew the number, though he rarely allowed himself the indulgence of counting precisely, a silent, internal testament to the indelible mark she had left, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of his hyper-controlled existence. They were, by all conventional measures, an improbable pairing. He, the driven, emotionally guarded billionaire, tethered to the relentless schedule of global finance, his life a symphony of carefully managed risks and calculated outcomes. She, the vibrant, unpredictable artist, living a life guided by inspiration, fueled by passion, and finding profound beauty in the chaotic imperfection of the world. They had met at an underground gallery opening she was participating in, an event far removed from the sterile elegance of his usual social circuit, attended initially out of a sense of obligation to a significant client who was a prominent patron of the arts. But he had stayed, mesmerized by a large, abstract piece pulsating with color, energy, and raw emotion. He had inquired about the artist, and across the crowded, noisy room, his eyes had found hers. She had a presence, an energy that drew him in, a refusal to be anything other than authentically herself, a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas he encountered daily in his world. She saw past the Thorne name, the public image, the immense wealth, to the man beneath, wounded perhaps and desperately lonely, yearning for a genuine connection that transcended status and success. She challenged him, pushed him outside his rigid comfort zone, introduced him to a world where value was measured not in dollars or power, but in emotion, creativity, and the messy, beautiful complexities of human connection. And he was utterly, completely undone by her. He fell in love with a ferocity that surprised and somewhat terrified him, a depth of feeling he hadn't known he was capable of possessing. He had tried, in his own way, to integrate her into his life, to shield her from the relentless demands, the inevitable scrutiny, and the less than savory characters who often circled his world of high finance. But his attempts were often clumsy, born more of a paternalistic, protective instinct and a desire to control her environment than a willingness to truly share vulnerability and allow her agency in navigating the complexities. He hadn't fully appreciated the strength of her independence, her fierce desire to stand on her own 2 feet, to protect her own identity outside of his immense shadow. The pressure of the Apollo Energy acquisition, a monumental deal worth billions and fraught with political intrigue, regulatory hurdles, and powerful, unseen opposition operating in the shadows, had pushed him to his absolute limits. He had been operating on minimal sleep, stress compounding his natural tendency towards control, suspicion, and emotional withdrawal. Their final argument, the night she walked out, had been a brutal, soul-bearing clash, fueled by exhaustion, profound misunderstanding, and his own deep-seated fears of being truly seen, truly accepted, and ultimately abandoned. He had lashed out, saying things he instantly regretted, words born of fear, stress, and a twisted attempt to push her away before she could inevitably leave him. He had questioned her understanding of his sacrifices, doubted her capacity to cope with the brutal realities of his world, implying a fragility that deeply offended her independent spirit and unwavering resilience. He saw the immediate hurt in her eyes, quickly replaced by a cold, resolute distance, a closing off he had never seen before. And then she was gone, not just from his apartment, but from his life, leaving behind only a void, a silence, and a million unanswered questions that echoed in the cavernous space of his success. He had searched, his initial frantic desperation quickly hardening into a grim, relentless determination that was the hallmark of his business success. He had deployed all his resources, his extensive network of contacts, but Isabella had vanished with an unnerving efficiency that suggested deliberate, careful planning. It was as if she had been a ghost, leaving no trace, no forwarding address, no contact number, no digital footprint. Her apartment, once so full of life and color, was empty, scrubbed clean of any hint of her presence. Her phone disconnected, her email accounts deactivated, her social media profiles meticulously erased or set to maximum privacy. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist, a beautiful, vibrant dream that had evaporated upon waking, leaving him with a crushing sense of loss, bewilderment, and a chilling question mark where her life used to be. The pain had settled deep, a constant, dull ache beneath his ribs, a physical manifestation of the void she had left. He had buried himself in work with a ferocity that bordered on self-destruction, expanding his empire ever higher, faster, using the relentless pursuit of success as an anesthetic against the agonizing grief and unanswered questions. He told himself she had found peace, found happiness elsewhere, perhaps a simpler life away from the pressures he embodied, found someone who could offer her what he, with his complicated, dangerous world, never could. It was a necessary self-deception, a psychological defense mechanism against the unbearable truth that he had, perhaps, irrevocably destroyed the best part of himself when he drove her away. Tonight, the gilded doors of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were open for the annual Thorne Enterprises Foundation Gala, an event he hosted to showcase his philanthropic efforts, particularly in the arts, and reinforce his image as a benefactor, a necessary performance in the elaborate, often hollow, theater of his life. He moved through the opulent halls, a figure of practiced charm and effortless authority, shaking hands, exchanging polite conversation, his mind a million miles away, replaying fragments of memories. Dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, a symbol of the world he inhabited, he felt like an actor playing a well-rehearsed role, the performance flawless, the underlying emptiness profound and constant. Roberts, his discreet and loyal chauffeur of 15 years, a man who had seen Julian through countless late nights and early mornings, whose silent presence was a comforting constant, navigated the notoriously difficult evening traffic of the Upper East Side, the streets packed with limousines and town cars. Julian stared out the tinted window, his gaze sweeping over the endless stream of faces on the street, each with their own story, their own destination, a million lives he would likely never touch, never know. And then, amidst the organized chaos of a street fair spilling onto the sidewalk near the museum district, a vibrant tapestry of temporary stalls, flashing lights, and hurried pedestrians, he saw her. It was a fleeting glimpse, a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, the kind of moment that replays endlessly in the mind, becoming sharper with each iteration. A flash of dark hair against the backdrop of colorful stalls and hurried pedestrians. A familiar posture as she bent down, her attention focused intently on someone small beside her. His breath hitched in his throat, sharp and sudden, cutting through the polite hum of conversation Julian was attempting with a business associate in the car. Isabella, here, now, his heart, a muscle usually kept under strict professional control, hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden silence that had fallen over his internal world. "Stop the car, Roberts," he ordered, his voice tight with a sudden, urgent intensity that startled the seasoned driver. The limousine, a sleek black symbol of his unassailable status, pulled over abruptly near a hot dog stand, drawing immediate, curious stares from the passers-by, a disruption in the carefully orchestrated flow of evening traffic. Julian didn't care about appearances, about the disruption, about the curious eyes now fixed on his vehicle. He had to be sure. He pushed open the heavy door himself, the cool evening air hitting his face like a shock, carrying the scent of roasted nuts and something sweet. He stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk, the energy of the city a tangible force, 1,000 stories unfolding around him. He moved through the small crowd, gathering near a street performer, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd seen her, pushing past startled onlookers, a man on a singular mission. The air was thick with a mingled sense of street food, exhaust fumes, and the perfume of 1,000 strangers. And there she was, unmistakably Isabella. She looked different. Older, certainly, with subtle lines of tiredness etched around her eyes, a certain weariness in her posture, a quiet strength he hadn't fully appreciated before, but her familiar grace, the way she held her head, the curve of her back, was still there, instantly recognizable. She was laughing, a sound he hadn't realized he was starting to hear, a genuine, heartfelt sound, the kind of laugh that started in her eyes as she helped a small child tie the laces on his brightly colored sneaker. A boy. He was small, no more than 5 years old, Julian estimated, with a riot of messy brown hair that caught the fading light like a scattered halo, a color startlingly familiar. He was wearing a brightly colored jacket, clutching a blue balloon that tugged precariously at his small hand, threatening to escape into the vast evening sky. He giggled at something Isabella said, a pure, joyful sound, high and clear, that resonated deep within Julian, a sound he had never heard directed at Isabella in such a way before. Then the boy tilted his head slightly, looking up at Isabella, his small face alight with innocent joy, utterly captivated by his mother. And in that moment, their profiles aligned, the angle of their faces, the curve of their cheeks. The boy's features, softened by childhood, were a startling echo of Julian's own. The shape of his nose, the curve of his lip, the slight stubborn set of his chin. It was like looking at a reflection of himself, seen through the softening, innocent lens of childhood, a mirror image across 5 years of separation. Julian froze, rooted to the spot amidst the swirling chaos of the street fair, the noise of the city fading to a distant murmur, the sights and sounds blurring into an indistinct backdrop. The blue balloon seemed to pulse against the twilight sky, a vibrant beacon drawing his gaze back, irresistibly, to the boy's eyes. They were his eyes, the same deep hazel, flecked with gold, wide and filled with a boundless curiosity and innocent intelligence that was startlingly, undeniably familiar. Moved on? The carefully constructed lie he had lived with for 5 long years, the shield he had used to protect himself from the agonizing pain of her loss, shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces, revealing a truth that was both terrifying and profoundly, breathtakingly hopeful. A child, her child, a son, and the undeniable, gut-wrenching certainty that slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath, leaving him reeling, his carefully controlled world tilting on its axis. This child, this vibrant, laughing boy, this boy with his eyes and his features, was his son. 5 years. The timeline aligned with a brutal, devastating, undeniable precision. He watched them, unseen, unheard, a statue amidst the moving stream of humanity, a man invisible in his own life. Isabella finished helping the boy with a shoelace, ruffled his messy hair, a gesture of such simple, profound tenderness, such everyday maternal affection, that it sent a jolt through Julian, a deep yearning for a connection he hadn't known he craved with such intensity. She took the boy's hand, her fingers intertwining with his small ones, and they began to walk away towards the quieter side street that led away from the heart of the street fair, heading towards the park entrance. The boy looked back once more, just a fleeting glance over his shoulder, his large, hazel eyes sweeping over the faces in the crowd, his gaze meeting Julian's across the short distance for a single, breathtaking second, a moment of pure, innocent curiosity meeting stunned, world-altering recognition, before Isabella gently guided him forward. And they were gone, swallowed by the crowd and the gathering darkness, leaving Julian alone on the sidewalk, the scent of roasted nuts in the distant city hum the only witnesses to his shattering realization. When Julian finally moved, his limbs felt heavy, disconnected, as if he had been standing there for an eternity, frozen in time. Roberts was at his side almost instantly, a look of deep concern etched on his usually impassive face. "Mr. Thorne? Are you all right? You look unwell. Should we return to the car?" "Yes, Roberts." Julian managed, his voice hoarse, unfamiliar even to his own ears, a raw sound in the bustling street. He forced himself to take a steadying breath, reasserting a semblance of control over his trembling body. "Just a moment. The gala. We should go." He got back into the car, the luxurious interior feeling suddenly cold and sterile, the scent of expensive leather cloying, suffocating. The Thorne Enterprises Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of his carefully constructed public life, was irrelevant. His carefully controlled world, built on logic, strategy, and unyielding steel, had just been profoundly, irrevocably altered in the space of a few seconds. He had a son he knew nothing about, a son who had been living just miles away for 5 years while Julian existed in a self-imposed vacuum of grief, regret, and devastating ignorance. The gala was a blur of forced smiles, polite conversation, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Julian moved through the opulent rooms of the museum like a ghost, a spectral figure in his own event, his mind replaying the fleeting image of Isabella and the boy, his son, his precious, unknown child. Every conversation felt meaningless, every smile a lie, every handshake an empty gesture. He performed the necessary rituals of the evening on autopilot, his body present, his mind a million miles away. He left early, citing a sudden illness, his carefully cultivated composure threatening to crumble under the immense weight of the revelation and the roiling emotions it unleashed. Back in the silent, echoing expanse of his penthouse, sleep was an impossibility. He paced the marble floors, the city lights twinkling outside like indifferent eyes, mocking him with their distant sparkle. Joy, fierce and overwhelming, surged through him at the thought of Marco, his son, his flesh and blood. A part of him he hadn't known was missing until he saw him. But it warred with a burning, almost unbearable anger towards Isabella. How could she keep his child a secret for 5 years? How could she deny him the knowledge, the presence, the joy of his own son? How could she make such a decision alone? But beneath the anger was a gnawing curiosity, a deep-seated suspicion that her total vanishing act, the life seemingly lived off the grid, the fear he had glimpsed in her eyes years ago and again on the street. It didn't fit the Isabella he knew, the fearless artist who embraced chaos. Why had she hidden? Who was she running from? Was the threat that drove her away 5 years ago still active, still looming over their lives? The thriller he had vaguely suspected in his own mind, a dramatic narrative of personal heartbreak and a woman trying to escape a painful past, was beginning to take on a chilling, tangible reality, with the stakes higher than he could have possibly imagined. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately, with a desperation that superseded everything else in his life, every deal, every market fluctuation. Before the first hint of dawn touched the sky, casting long shadows across the city, he was in his office, on a secure line with Marcus Thorne. Marcus was more than just a security chief for Thorne Enterprises. He was a former CIA operative with a network that spanned the globe, a man utterly discreet, ruthlessly efficient, and fiercely loyal, a man Julian trusted implicitly. Alexander laid out the facts, his voice tight, controlled, betraying none of the emotional chaos raging within him. "I saw her, Marcus, Isabella Rossi, last night, near the park, and she was with a child. a boy about 5 years old. I believe. I know he's my son. He looked Marcus directly in the eye, his gaze intense, unwavering. Find them. Immediately. Discreetly. I need to know everything about her life since she disappeared. Every address, every job, every contact, every interaction. I want a complete profile of her life and anyone she's been in contact with. And absolute secrecy is paramount. This information does not leave this operation. No one, absolutely no one outside of this specific team, is to know about this. Understood. Marcus's expression remained impassive, a skill honed by years in the shadows of intelligence work. His voice was calm, professional. Understood, Mr. Thorne. We will mobilize immediately. Consider it our top priority. We'll deploy resources on the ground and through digital channels. We'll be thorough and discreet. Within hours, the formidable resources of Thorne Enterprises' intelligence apparatus were directed towards one single, urgent, and highly personal goal: uncovering the life of Isabella Rossi since her disappearance 5 years ago. A dedicated team of seasoned private investigators, forensic analysts, digital trackers, and human intelligence gatherers were put on the case, working around the clock under Marcus Thorne's direct supervision. The initial reports confirmed Alexander's observation: a boy, approximately 5 years old, named Marco. His birth certificate, obtained discreetly through a secure channel, listed only Isabella Rossi as the parent. The space for the father's name was conspicuously blank. The absence was a raw, painful wound that Julian stared at on the digital report, a stark confirmation of the secret she had kept, a physical manifestation of the years stolen from him. The investigation into Isabella's life after she left revealed a pattern of movement that was anything but stable or settled. After leaving New York, she had briefly stayed with a distant relative in a small, isolated town in rural Pennsylvania for a few months, working odd jobs for cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. Then, she had moved to Chicago, taking on temporary work as a gallery assistant and living in a series of sublet apartments. From Chicago, she had relocated again, this time to a small town in New England, finding employment in a local bookstore while pursuing freelance graphic design work on the side, utilizing online platforms under pseudonyms. She never stayed in one place for longer than a year or 18 months, constantly moving from one temporary situation to another. She rarely used credit cards, preferring cash transactions whenever possible, and her online presence was minimal to non-existent. Email addresses were changed frequently, social media accounts were either deleted or never created, and phone numbers were burner phones, used briefly and then discarded after only a few weeks or months. It was a life lived deliberately below the radar, a constant state of transition, almost as if she were actively trying to remain hidden, to be untraceable, to disappear into the fabric of everyday life. The financial records, sparse and difficult to piece together as they were, painted a clear picture of a life lived frugally, often struggling to make ends meet. There were periods where her income was barely enough to cover basic expenses for herself and Marco. She received no financial support from anyone, no family, no friends, certainly no unknown benefactor. She was doing this alone, building a life for herself and Marco through sheer determination, hard work, and immense personal sacrifice. This realization, seeing the material challenges she had faced, the sacrifices she had undoubtedly made while raising his son in anonymity, added another complex layer to Julian's emotions, a profound sense of guilt for her struggles, a deep admiration for her resilience and strength, and a burning, almost desperate need to understand why she had chosen this difficult path, why she had cut herself off completely from everyone she knew, including him. The investigation finally yielded a more stable, long-term location, an apartment in Brooklyn, a world away from the glittering towers and exclusive enclaves Julian inhabited. It was a quiet, residential neighborhood of brownstones, tree-lined streets, and a strong sense of community, a place where people knew their neighbors and life moved at a slower pace. The reports included detailed surveillance photos and reports from discreet human intelligence on the ground. Isabella walking Marco to the local public school, a sturdy brick building filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the cheerful chaos of dismissal time. Isabella carrying heavy grocery bags, her shoulders slumped with fatigue, but her gaze determined. Marco laughing on a swing in the local park. Isabella pushing him higher, her face illuminated by a maternal love so profound, so pure, that it stole Julian's breath and brought an ache to his chest that was both painful and strangely hopeful. He saw her interacting with other parents at the school gate, exchanging pleasantries with neighbors on the stoop, navigating the daily challenges of life as a single mother with a quiet strength and resilience he hadn't fully appreciated before. He saw her reading to Marco on a park bench, their heads bent together, a scene of such simple, profound connection that it brought a lump to his throat. And Marco was a whirlwind of energy, a bright, curious child, quick to laugh, full of questions, clutching Isabella's hand with an almost fierce affection, as if he were her entire world, which in many ways he was. Julian watched him play, his heart aching with a mix of longing, regret, and a fierce, protective instinct that surged through him with an intensity he had never experienced before. He saw echoes of himself in Marco's mannerisms, in the way he tilted his head when he was concentrating on something, the slight stubborn set of his jaw when he was determined to figure something out, the way he moved with a quick, decisive energy, the way he absorbed the world around him with wide, observant eyes. Marco was undeniably, profoundly his son, a small, living piece of himself he hadn't known existed until now. The gnawing question of why she had disappeared so completely and kept Marco a secret for 5 long years consumed him. The investigators, after extensive surveillance, background checks, and discreet inquiries, found no immediate evidence of overt danger in Brooklyn. There were no obvious signs of being followed, no known threats in her current life, no suspicious individuals lingering around her building. But the pattern of her previous movements, her extreme privacy measures, her deliberate efforts to disappear, it all pointed to something more than just a desire for a quiet life after a painful breakup. Was she still afraid? Was the threat that drove her away 5 years ago still active, still looming over their lives, a ghost from the past waiting to resurface? The thriller he had vaguely suspected in his own mind, a dramatic narrative of personal heartbreak and a woman trying to escape a painful past, was quickly becoming a chilling, tangible reality, with the stakes higher than he could have possibly imagined. He knew he couldn't wait forever, living on surveillance reports and grainy photographs, a distant, unseen observer in his own son's life. The need to understand the full truth directly from Isabella, to hear the story from her own lips, to understand the depth of the danger she had faced, compelled him to act. He needed to speak with her, to break the silence that had separated them for 5 long years, to finally understand the why. He chose a late afternoon, a day he knew Marco had an after-school activity that would occupy him for a period, hoping to catch Isabella alone or with minimal interruption, in a setting that offered a degree of privacy, if not complete security. He found her outside the local community center where Marco had a drawing class he attended once a week. The street was quieter than the bustling schoolyard, but still had a steady flow of neighborhood residents, parents picking up their children, and people running errands. He parked his car several blocks away, instructing Roberts to wait, and walked towards her, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension, determination, and a profound sense of unreality, stepping out of his carefully constructed world into the unexpected reality of hers. Isabella. His voice, though kept deliberately low, was distinct in the late afternoon air, cutting through the ambient sounds of distant traffic, children's voices from inside the building, and casual conversations. She froze instantly, her body tensing, every muscle rigid with shock, as if she had been struck by an invisible force. She turned slowly, her face draining of color, her eyes widening in disbelief and a flicker of something that looked like pure, unadulterated panic, raw and visceral. "Julian," she whispered, the name barely audible, a fragile sound on the air, a name she likely hadn't spoken aloud in years. He stood before her, a figure of immense presence and power in his world, a man who commanded rooms and moved markets, yet feeling utterly exposed, vulnerable, a man stripped bare by the overwhelming weight of this moment, this confrontation. His gaze swept over her face, seeing the lines of tiredness, the lingering fear that seemed to always reside in her eyes, and the profound shock of seeing him here, now, in this quiet corner of her life. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice urgent, low enough not to attract undue attention from the few people nearby, but vibrating with an intensity that conveyed the gravity of the moment. "About Marco. About why you left. About everything that happened after you left." Her eyes darted nervously around the street, her body language tense, ready to bolt, like a cornered animal assessing escape routes. She hugged her arms instinctively, a self-protective gesture, her gaze flickering towards the doors of the community center, where Marco was still inside. "Not here, Julian. Please. It's not safe. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have found me." "Not safe?" he pressed, the words confirming his deepest fears, adding another chilling layer to the puzzle. "Why isn't it safe, Isabella? Who are you afraid of? What happened after you left?" She hesitated, biting her lip, her mind clearly racing, weighing the risks of speaking, the necessity of finally revealing the truth, against the potential consequences of his presence here. Before she could answer, the double doors of the community center opened, and children began to spill out into the late afternoon light, a cheerful cascade of energy and sound, their parents waiting with open arms. Marco was among them, his small face alight with the pride of a new drawing clutched carefully in his hand, eager to show his mother his creation. He saw Isabella waiting. His face broke into a wide, happy grin as he ran toward her, his small legs pumping, his messy brown hair bouncing with each stride. Isabella's expression shifted instantly, the fear in her eyes momentarily masked by a forced calm. A protective shield she instinctively raised to protect Marco from the tension, the unspoken drama unfolding before him. She knelt down as Marco reached her, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him close, shielding him slightly with her body, burying her face in his hair for a moment. Marco, chattering excitedly about his drawing, oblivious to the tension radiating between the two adults, glanced at Julian, his brow furrowed with mild curiosity at the presence of this tall stranger who was talking to his mommy. Isabella met Julian's gaze over the top of Marco's head, her eyes pleading, conveying a clear message. Not now, not here, not in front of him. Julian understood. This was not the time, not the place for this earth-shattering conversation. The presence of Marco, the potential for danger, the public setting, necessitated a different approach, a different time. "Perhaps another time, then," Julian said, his voice adopting a tone of polite, though slightly awkward, encounter playing the role she had implicitly assigned him, the role of a stranger. "It was unexpected, seeing you, Isabella." Isabella nodded curtly, her grip on Marco's hand tightening slightly, her body language still tense. "Yes, unexpected. My apartment," Julian said, his voice low, decisive, his gaze holding hers, cutting through the thin pretense of polite conversation, conveying the urgency of his need for answers. "Tonight, after he's asleep, 9 o'clock. I need to understand, Isabella. I need to know everything." She hesitated for a moment longer, weighing the risks, the necessity of finally revealing the truth that had been hidden for 5 years, the potential consequences of his entering her life, their life now. The urgency in his eyes, the unwavering determination in his voice, told her he would not be deterred, that he would find her again if she refused. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of the inevitable. 9 o'clock. I'll be there, he confirmed, his gaze holding hers, a silent promise of his arrival and an unspoken demand for the truth that had been hidden for 5 long, agonizing years. He stepped back, allowing her space, creating a physical distance, and watched as she stood up, taking Marco's hand, his son still chattering about his drawing, happily oblivious to the profound shift that had just occurred in the lives of the adults around him. Isabella offered Julian another strained, polite smile, a thin veneer over the fear that still lingered in her eyes. Then she gently guided Marco away, melting into the stream of parents and children dispersing from the community center, heading towards their home, leaving Julian standing alone on the sidewalk, the weight of his son's existence and the chilling certainty of the danger surrounding them pressing down on him, a heavy, suffocating cloak. The encounter, brief and public, had only deepened the mystery and intensified the fear. Who was they? How deep did the threat run? And why? Why had Isabella chosen to face it all alone for 5 years? The wait until 9 o'clock was an agonizing torment that stretched into an eternity. Julian returned to his office, the familiar symbols of his power and control now feeling hollow and inadequate, unable to shield him from this very real, very personal threat. The sheer vulnerability of Isabella and Marco, the gut-wrenching realization that they had been living under a constant threat directly linked to him and his world, filled him with a protective rage so fierce it threatened to consume him, an intensity he had never experienced in the boardroom. He couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't focus on anything other than the image of Marco's innocent face, Isabella's haunted eyes, and the burning question of who had threatened them and why, and whether that threat was still active. He spent the intervening hours with Marcus Thorne, poring over every detail of the ongoing investigation into the collector and his network. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, slowly but surely, painting a disturbing picture of a ruthless individual, identified as Victor Moreau, who operated with impunity in the shadows, using intimidation and violence to protect his illicit financial empire and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose him. The anonymous threats Isabella received 5 years ago, the deliberate measures she took to disappear, the pattern of her movements across the country, it all fit Victor Moreau's modus operandi perfectly. He had targeted Isabella, Julian's known vulnerability, her unexpected pregnancy, to cripple him professionally and personally, likely as a strategic move to disrupt the Apollo Energy acquisition, which threatened Moreau's own interests. Marcus's team had uncovered chilling details about Moreau's network, his connections to organized crime, his use of sophisticated surveillance technology, his ability to compromise individuals and systems through blackmail and coercion. The realization that this threat was not just a ghost from the past, but a real, active danger that had resurfaced with Julian's appearance in Isabella's life sent a shiver down Julian's spine. The seemingly innocent street fair encounter, the drawing class, the Brooklyn apartment, they were all potential targets, their quiet life suddenly vulnerable. At 9 o'clock precisely, Julian stood on the third-floor landing outside Isabella's apartment in Brooklyn, the quiet residential building a stark contrast to the heavily secured environment he usually inhabited. He took a deep breath, attempting to compose himself, pushing down the roiling mix of apprehension, anger, hope, and profound sadness. He raised his hand and knocked. Isabella opened the door, her face pale, but her gaze was steady, resolute, meeting his directly. The apartment was quiet, dimly lit, the comforting scent of a child's bedtime, perhaps residual warmth from a bath, the faint smell of children's toothpaste, a lingering sweetness from a bedtime snack, filling the air, creating a sense of warmth and security that seemed at odds with the tension in the room. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner. A colorful drawing was taped proudly to the refrigerator. Small shoes were lined up neatly by the door, tangible reminders of the life she had built here, a life he knew nothing about, a life built in secrecy and fear. She led him into the small living room, a space that felt intimate and real, lived in, a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal opulence of his own world. It was a home built with love and resilience, a sanctuary she had created in the face of overwhelming fear. They sat across from each other on mismatched chairs, a small coffee table between them, a gulf spanning 5 years of separation, unspoken words, pain, and unanswered questions. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city outside and the faint, rhythmic breathing coming from the closed door of Marco's bedroom. "He's asleep," Isabella said softly, breaking the silence, her voice quiet, a little tired but steady. "Thank you for seeing me, Isabella," Julian said, his voice low, stripped of its usual boardroom authority, raw with emotion. "For agreeing to talk. I saw him yesterday, on the street. I had to be sure. My investigators, they confirmed what I suspected." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a deep sadness, an acceptance of the inevitable that lay between them. "You saw him, Julian. It was bound to happen eventually, I suppose, despite my efforts. I tried to stay hidden, to disappear completely. I saw him." He confirmed again, the image of Marco's face, his eyes, filling his mind, a constant, vivid presence, a reality he was still struggling to fully grasp. He's my son, isn't he?" "Yes," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, the confirmation hitting him anew with its profound, life-altering weight. "He's your son, Julian." Julian closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the truth, the overwhelming reality of it. He had a son he had missed for 5 years. 5 years of his life, of Marco's life gone. The first steps, the first words, the scraped knees, the birthday candles, the bedtime stories, all missed. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was intense, searching hers, demanding answers, needing to understand the why. "Why, Isabella? Why keep him from me? Why disappear completely? How could you do that? How could you make that decision alone?" She took a deep, shaky breath, her hands twisting in her lap, her gaze dropping to her fingers, tracing the worn lines of her palm. "It wasn't simple, Julian. Not simple at all. It wasn't about you, not entirely. Not about not wanting you to know, not about denying you fatherhood because I was angry or hurt. After our argument, I was devastated. I felt like I had failed, like I didn't belong in your world, like I was just collateral damage in your life, something easily broken and discarded when the pressure was too high, when things got complicated." She paused, her voice trembling slightly, reliving the raw pain and confusion of that time. "And then I found out I was pregnant, about a week after I left." He listened intently, his heart aching for the young woman who had faced this alone, carrying the weight of their breakup and the shock of a pregnancy, convinced she had no one to turn to, no one to rely on. He remembered the raw pain in her eyes that last night, the harsh, thoughtless words he had hurled at her in his own stress-fueled misery, words he instantly regretted but couldn't take back, words that had clearly landed on her with devastating force, confirming her deepest fears about his inability to truly integrate her into his life, to protect her from its darker elements. "I didn't know what to do," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength as she spoke, the words flowing now, a torrent of pent-up fear and explanation. "I was alone, scared, and facing motherhood on my own, with no safety net, no plan. I saw how your life was, Julian, the constant pressure, the relentless demands, the complete lack of privacy, the inherent dangers of the world you inhabited, the kind of people who circled you. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into that. Not after our argument. Not with the uncertainty between us. Not with the understanding that my presence in your life made me a potential target." She paused again, her gaze lifting to meet his, her eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness and regret. I honestly thought it would be a burden to you. That you wouldn't want the responsibility, the complication of a child, given the complexities of your life, your career, your reputation." "A complication," he repeated, his voice rising slightly, a mix of pain, disbelief, and a growing anger at the devastating misconception she had carried, the lies she had believed about him. "Isabella, he's my son. My son. How could you possibly think I wouldn't want him? How could you believe that? How could you keep him from me for 5 years?" "Because it wasn't safe, Julian," she countered, her voice rising as well, though still hushed, a desperate edge to it. The fear from the street encounter earlier returning to her eyes, raw and visceral. "It wasn't safe for him. It wasn't safe for us. That's why I disappeared. That's why I kept him a secret. Not because I didn't want you to know, but because I was terrified of what would happen if you did." He stared at her, the confirmation of his deepest fears chilling him to the bone, sending a cold dread through him, a physical tightening in his chest. The investigator's suspicions, Marcus's analysis, his own terrifying intuition. It was all true. Safe from what, Isabella? Who were you afraid of? Tell me everything. Everything that happened after I last saw you. She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as if checking for unseen listeners, for hidden microphones, for threats lurking in the shadows outside. The fear was still palpable, a constant companion she had lived with for 5 years, a deeply ingrained part of her existence. From your world, Julian. From the people in it. They contacted me after I left your place that night. It started about a week later, after I had left New York and was staying with my aunt in Pennsylvania. They knew who I was, knew I was involved with you, knew I had just left you, knew I was hurting and vulnerable. And then they told me they knew about the baby, that they had been watching you for a long time, watching me. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, thick with remembered terror, her eyes wide and haunted, reliving the chilling details. They were anonymous, untraceable calls, messages from burner phones, emails sent through encrypted channels that couldn't be traced back to a specific source. They said if I didn't disappear completely, if I didn't break all ties with you, never try to contact you again, and never reveal the child to you or anyone connected to you, they would ensure your Apollo Energy deal failed, that they would cripple Thorn Enterprises. And they said they would hurt you. They described your movements, your routine, things only someone with deep knowledge of your life would know. And they threatened me and the baby directly. They knew details about my life, Julian, things I'd only told you, or maybe one or two closest friends. They described my aunt's house, the town I was in, the job I was considering. They sent me photos, grainy photos, proving they were following me, watching my aunt's house, watching the places I went. It was terrifying proof that they were serious, that their reach was extensive. Julian felt a cold dread spread through him, a sickening confirmation of the depravity he had suspected. Victor Moreau. This was precisely the kind of ruthless, personal, and calculated attack Moreau was known for. They had targeted Isabella, his known vulnerability, her unexpected pregnancy, her isolation, to cripple him professionally and personally, to gain devastating leverage in a multi-billion-dollar deal that threatened Moreau's own illicit interests. It was a level of cruelty that was almost unimaginable, a testament to the ruthless lengths some people would go to for power and money, for control. They said if I ever tried to contact you, if you ever found me, if I ever revealed Marco's existence to you or anyone connected to Thorn Enterprises, they would make good on their threats. She continued, her voice trembling again, raw with the fear she had carried alone for so long. They said they would destroy Thorn Enterprises, take everything from you, ruin your reputation, expose your secrets. And they said they would make sure the baby wouldn't survive, that they would take him away from me, make him disappear, or worse. They made it very clear, Julian. They left no room for doubt. Julian stood up slowly, unable to sit still, the small apartment feeling suddenly claustrophobic, exposed, the quiet street outside seeming less peaceful and more menacing, a place where unseen threats might lurk in the shadows. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below, seeing it now through the lens of potential danger, seeing the shadows where unseen threats might still be hiding. They had used her love for him, her vulnerability, her pregnancy, her isolation as a weapon, a cruel and effective strategy. You believe them, he stated, his voice low and rough with emotion. Not a question, but a painful understanding of the impossible, terrifying position she had been put in. I was young, Julian, barely out of art school, and alone, and pregnant, and someone was threatening the lives of the two people I cared about most in the world, she cried out softly, standing up to face him, her voice filled with the desperate helplessness of the past, the trauma she had endured. They made it terrifyingly real. They knew things they shouldn't have known. They had proof they were watching me. I had no idea who they were, how powerful they were, how far their reach extended. I was completely isolated, with no one to turn to who could possibly understand or help. Leaving felt like the only way to protect you. To protect Marco. It was a desperate choice, a sacrifice I made believing it was the only way to keep you both safe. He turned back to her, his heart aching with the weight of the fear she had carried alone for 5 long years, the unimaginable burden she had borne in silence, the resilience it must have taken to survive. You shouldn't have had to face that alone, Isabella. You should have come to me. We could have faced them together. We could have fought them. How, Julian? She challenged, her voice filled with the frustration of past helplessness, of feeling utterly powerless against unseen enemies, a faceless threat. With what? I had no names, no faces, no concrete evidence other than anonymous threats and proof they were watching me. I had no idea if they were connected to people inside Thorn Enterprises, people you trusted, people who had access to you. I was terrified that if I came to you, if I revealed the threat, it would only put you in greater danger, and that their threats against Marco would become real. I convinced myself that if I vanished, if I removed myself as your known weakness, if you didn't even know about Marco, they would leave you alone. That you were safer without me in your life, without the knowledge of Leo's existence being a liability that could be exploited. He walked towards her slowly, closing the small distance between them, reaching out to take her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent promise of support, protection, and a shared future, a connection that had been denied for too long. Isabella. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, finally allowing the dam of suppressed emotion to break. Tears streamed down her face, silent and heavy, wetting his shirt where her head rested against his chest. She was trembling, the residue of 5 years of fear, isolation, and the immense burden she had carried alone. It was so hard, Julian, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, the words tumbling out, a torrent of pain and catharsis. So incredibly hard. Raising Marco alone, constantly looking over my shoulder, always afraid they would find us, that I hadn't been careful enough, that I had somehow put him in danger just by existing, just by being your connection. Every time we moved, every time I started a new job, every time I heard an unfamiliar noise outside, the fear was always there, a cold knot in my stomach, a constant companion. But then I would look at Marco, see his face, his innocent joy, his boundless energy, his beautiful eyes, and know that I had done it for him. That he was safe because I had left, because I had kept him hidden, because I had chosen his safety above everything else. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her tightly, his chin resting on her hair, his arms a protective shield around her. He could feel her trembling, the weight of the years of fear, isolation, and the immense burden she had carried alone, finally beginning to lift, shared now between them. You were so incredibly brave, Isabella, he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion, with a profound sense of admiration and awe. More brave than I could have imagined. You faced down your fear, alone, for 5 years, to protect our son. I am so sorry that you had to do that. That my world brought this upon you. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the years of separation melting away in the shared understanding of the terrible circumstances that had driven them apart, the immense sacrifice she had made, the trauma they had both endured, albeit in different ways. The pain was still present, the regret for the lost years, the acknowledging of the trauma they had both carried, but beneath the pain, a fragile, powerful hope began to stir, a sense of reconnection, a profound bond that had not only survived separation, fear, and unimaginable pressure, but had been forged and strengthened in the crucible of adversity. In that moment, holding Isabella, feeling her trembling body against his, knowing Marco was asleep in the next room, safe for now, Julian felt a sense of purpose and belonging that transcended all his wealth and power, all his professional achievements. This was what truly mattered. This was his family. Over the following weeks and months, Alexander dedicated the full force of Thorne Enterprises' formidable resources and his own relentless determination to dismantling Victor Moreau's network, not just as a matter of corporate defense, but as a deeply personal mission to protect his family and seek justice for what Isabella had endured. Marcus Thorne, a man whose calm exterior hid a steel core and a brilliant strategic mind honed by years in the intelligence world, led the investigation with unwavering focus and a shared sense of urgency. He assembled a multidisciplinary team of top-tier professionals, former intelligence operatives specializing in countersurveillance, infiltration, and threat assessment, financial forensic experts capable of following the most convoluted international money laundering trails, cybersecurity specialists who could penetrate even the most sophisticated digital defenses and recover encrypted communications, and legal strategists experienced in prosecuting complex white-collar and organized crimes. The investigation was a deep dive into the darkest corners of the financial world, a complex, multi-layered puzzle with pieces scattered across continents, revealing the true scale and depravity of Moreau's operation. They uncovered a vast, interconnected web of illegal activities, including large-scale insider trading, multinational money laundering schemes, sophisticated blackmail operations targeting key figures in government and industry to gain influence and control, and a chilling history of using intimidation, violence, and even murder to silence opposition and eliminate perceived threats. Victor Moreau wasn't just a corporate raider. He was the head of a sophisticated, ruthless criminal enterprise that used legitimate businesses as a front for its illicit operations, operating with impunity and a complete disregard for human life. The danger, they quickly realized, was not confined to the past. It was immediate, pervasive, and escalating with every step Alexander's team took closer to exposing Moreau. As the investigation progressed, meticulously gathering evidence and identifying key players in Moreau's network, the retaliation for Moreau became more aggressive, more frequent, and chillingly personal. The anonymous threats against Isabella and Marco increased in volume and severity, now often containing chillingly specific details about Marco's routines or the secure property, proving that Moreau's reach extended further than they initially anticipated, that he had eyes and ears everywhere. These threats were designed to intimidate Julian, to force him to back down, to make him choose between protecting his family and bringing Moreau to justice. They were accompanied by more overt signs of surveillance and harassment. Cars parked on streets near the Brooklyn apartment for extended periods, individuals observed loitering near places Isabella and Marco had frequented before moving to the secure location. Suspicious activity online targeting people connected to Isabella's past life or Julian's circle, attempt to compromise their digital security. The subtle acts of intimidation quickly escalated to more direct and dangerous actions. There was a small fire set in the hallway of Isabella's old apartment building in Brooklyn, quickly extinguished by responding firefighters, but clearly an act of arson intended as a terrifying message. A series of sophisticated online attacks targeted Julian's personal digital accounts and those of key Thorne Enterprises executives, attempting to steal sensitive information, plant malware, or disrupt critical operations. The incident that truly brought the danger home with terrifying clarity was a carefully orchestrated accident targeting Isabella and Marco. As Isabella was leaving the grocery store with Marco one afternoon, during a brief, approved outing with a discreet security detail, a large delivery truck ran a red light at high speed and narrowly missed hitting her car by mere inches. The timing was too precise, the circumstances too deliberate to be a coincidence. Marcus's team, working quickly with law enforcement, determined the truck had been stolen hours earlier and deliberately positioned to intersect Isabella's path at that exact moment, its driver a low-level operative in Moreau's network. It was a chillingly clear message from Moreau. Back off, or the threats would become terrifying reality. This near-fatal incident, the stark reality that Marco and Isabella had almost been killed because of him, because of his enemies, because of the world he inhabited, pushed Julian to the absolute brink. The stakes were no longer just financial or professional. They were deeply, terrifyingly personal matters of life and death. His son, the woman he loved, had almost been murdered because of his world, because of Victor Moreau. He immediately escalated security measures to an unprecedented level, deploying resources that far exceeded standard corporate security. He insisted Isabella and Marco permanently relocate from the Brooklyn apartment, which was now clearly compromised and unsafe, to one of Thorne Enterprises' most secure properties, a sprawling, fortified estate in a secluded area upstate, several hours from the city. It was a veritable fortress, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, reinforced structures, panic rooms, and staffed with a large, highly trained, rotating security detail led personally by Marcus Thorne, who established a command center on the property. It was a beautiful property surrounded by acres of private land, with sprawling gardens, a large indoor pool, and extensive recreational facilities, but it felt, to Isabella, like a gilded cage, a constant, suffocating reminder that they were living under a very real, very present threat, their lives dictated by the movements of a dangerous criminal. She struggled with the loss of her independence, her freedom of movement, the constant presence of armed guards, the feeling of being a prisoner, albeit a protected one. Julian understood her frustration, her yearning for normalcy, her feeling of being trapped, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that their safety was his absolute priority, overriding all other concerns, all protests. He worked closely with Marcus and the security team to make the environment as comfortable and as close to normal as possible for Marco, creating play areas, ensuring he had access to educational materials, arranging for supervised playdates with the children of the security staff or with specially vetted and secure playmates. Living together under these high-stress, highly secured, and isolated circumstances forced Julian and Isabella to confront their past and navigate their present in a confined, intense environment. The initial days at the estate were tense, filled with the awkwardness of two people who had once been intimately connected but were now separated by years of unshared experiences, profound trauma, and a constant undercurrent of fear and vigilance. They spent hours talking, often late into the night after Marco was asleep, revisiting every painful memory, every misunderstanding from their breakup, every unspoken fear that had haunted them during their separation. They talked about their relationship, the pressures that had contributed to its breakdown, the terrible circumstances that had forced Isabella into hiding, the emotional toll it had taken on both of them, the sacrifices they had made. It was an emotionally exhausting process, filled with tears, moments of anger, arguments fueled by past hurts, and hesitant, tentative steps towards forgiveness and understanding. They began attending therapy sessions with a trauma-informed therapist who was brought to the estate via secure transportation, both individually and together, to process the trauma of the past 5 years, to understand the complex dynamics of their past relationship, and to build a healthier foundation for their relationship and their family moving forward. The therapist helped them navigate the complex emotional landscape, providing tools to communicate more effectively, to rebuild trust after years of secrecy and separation, to process the fear and anxiety, and to heal the deep wounds they both carried. Isabella worked through her feelings of betrayal and hurt from their breakup, the immense fear and isolation she had endured, and the lingering difficulty of trusting again. Julian grappled with the guilt of his past insensitivities, the devastating realization of the danger his world had brought upon them, his own deep-seated fears of vulnerability, loss, and failure, and the immense responsibility he now carried. Julian dedicated himself to being a father to Marco, a role he embraced with a fierce, protective love that surprised even himself with its depth and intensity. He adjusted his schedule drastically, prioritizing time with his son above all else, pushing back meetings, delegating tasks, creating boundaries he had never allowed before. He carved out hours each day from his relentless work schedule, leaving the towering corporate world of strategy and deals behind to fully enter the smaller, more vibrant, and infinitely more important world of his son. He learned Marco's favorite cartoon characters, his preferred bedtime stories, the way he liked his toast cut, the games that made him giggle uncontrollably, the specific way he liked his Lego built. He spent hours playing with him in the sprawling gardens of the estate, building elaborate Lego castles and train sets in the playroom, reading to him in quiet corners, teaching him simple things like how to catch a ball or the names of different trees on the property. He attended every one of Marco's limited activities at the secure property, structured play sessions with the security staff's children, educational tutoring, supervised playdates with specially vetted and secured playmates brought to the estate. He watched him interact with others, a powerful billionaire standing on the sidelines of a makeshift soccer game, his heart swelling with a protective pride he had never known, a fierce joy in simply witnessing his son's existence. Marco, initially shy and somewhat wary of this imposing man who was suddenly a constant presence in his life, slowly opened up, responding to Julian's unwavering attention, his gentle persistence, his quiet strength, and his genuine affection. He began to seek out Julian, climbing into his lap during story time, reaching for his hand during walks around the secure grounds, asking for Daddy Julian when Julian was on a video call or in a meeting, his small voice and melody that cut through the tension. The bond between them grew, a powerful, undeniable connection that filled the void in Julian's life and brought a warmth and purpose he hadn't felt in years. Marco began to share his drawings with Julian, his secrets, his small triumphs and frustrations, cementing their relationship, a father and son finding each other after years of separation. The thriller element was a constant, pervasive, and deeply unsettling undercurrent to their lives at the secure estate. Even within the heavily fortified walls, the sense of being watched, of potential danger lurking just beyond the perimeter, was ever present. Victor Moreau, cornered and increasingly desperate as Julian's team tightened the net around him, continued to strike out, lashing out like a trapped animal. There was a brazen attempt to infiltrate the estate, a complex plan involving compromising a service provider who had legitimate access to the property, but it was thwarted by the swift and efficient response of Marcus's highly trained security team, resulting in a tense standoff, an exchange of gunfire, and the apprehension of Thorne's operatives. The incident served as a chilling reminder that Moreau would stop at nothing to silence Julian and protect his empire, and that their security, while robust, was not absolute. That vigilance was paramount. Julian, working closely with Marcus and the federal agencies, felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, the knowledge that their lives depended on his actions, on the success of the investigation. He was not just protecting Thorne Enterprises anymore. He was protecting his family, the most precious thing in his life, from a truly dangerous and desperate individual. In parallel with the direct threat from Moreau, Julian also faced significant challenges within Thorne Enterprises itself. Moreau's attempts to manipulate the markets, spread damaging rumors about Julian's personal life and the ongoing investigation, and orchestrate targeted cyber attacks on the company's infrastructure, combined with the disruption caused by the investigation and the necessary security measures that required Julian's constant attention, led to a period of significant instability for the company. Rivals attempted to exploit the situation, sensing weakness at the top, launching hostile takeover attempts, and spreading disinformation. Julian had to fight on two major fronts simultaneously, defending his family from a dangerous criminal and defending his empire from opportunistic competitors. He spent hours each day on secure video calls, managing crises, reassuring investors, strategizing with his executive team, all while remaining physically present at the secure estate, juggling the roles of CEO and father under immense, unrelenting pressure. The business subplot became deeply intertwined with the personal danger, highlighting how Moreau's ruthlessness extended into every facet of Julian's life, seeking to destroy him professionally as well as personally. The investigation into Victor Moreau's network intensified, delving deeper into his international connections, his complex financial structures, and his extensive history of violence and coercion. Marcus's team worked tirelessly, following every lead, piecing together the intricate puzzle of Moreau's criminal enterprise, uncovering the full scope of his operations. They identified key players in Moreau's organization, a network of corrupt officials in various countries, highly skilled hackers capable of sophisticated cybercrimes, ruthless enforcers willing to commit violence, complicit financial institutions facilitating his money laundering, and individuals who had been blackmailed or intimidated into cooperating with his schemes. They uncovered evidence of other crimes Moreau had committed, other lives he had ruined, other families he had terrorized, painting a comprehensive and horrifying picture of a truly dangerous and depraved individual who operated with impunity, believing himself to be untouchable. The climax of their long ordeal, the culmination of years of fear, hiding, and relentless pursuit, arrived after months of painstaking investigative work, living under constant threat and navigating the complexities of their rekindled family life. Marcus and his team, working in close coordination with multiple federal agencies, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Department of Justice, and international law enforcement partners across Europe and Asia, finally gathered irrefutable, damning evidence linking Victor Moreau directly to the threats against Isabella and Marco, the attempt to derail the Apollo Energy deal, and a vast array of other criminal activities, including multiple instances of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Federal indictments were handed down in multiple jurisdictions, both domestically and internationally, outlining the full scope of Moreau's criminal enterprise and his crimes. A large-scale, coordinated operation was launched simultaneously across several states and internationally, a complex logistical and strategic undertaking involving hundreds of law enforcement personnel, designed to apprehend Moreau and his key associates before they could escape or destroy evidence. The night of the raids was the longest of Julian's life, a night filled with a tense, nervous energy that crackled in the air. He remained at the secure estate with Isabella and Marco, surrounded by the quiet, professional presence of his security team. Isabella stayed by his side, her hand in his, their shared anxiety a palpable force in the heavily secured command center Marcus had set up. They had prepared for this night, going over every potential scenario with Marcus, every possible outcome. Marco, thankfully, slept soundly in his room, a picture of peaceful innocence, oblivious to the dramatic events unfolding that would finally, hopefully, free them from the shadow of fear that had loomed over their lives for so long. They monitored the progress of the raids via a secure video feed and encrypted communication channels, watching the strategic movements of law enforcement teams closing in on Moreau's various known locations: luxury apartments, offshore offices, private estates, clandestine meeting points. Hours crawled by, each minute an eternity, filled with hushed updates from Marcus and the tense silence of waiting, the fate of their family hanging in the balance. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky outside, casting a pale golden light over the sprawling estate grounds, the message came through, relayed by Marcus in a calm, steady voice. Victor Moreau was in custody. He had been apprehended at a private airfield in a remote location as he attempted a last-ditch effort to flee the country in his private jet. His key lieutenants and numerous other members of his vast criminal network had also been apprehended in coordinated raids conducted simultaneously across the globe. The vast, insidious criminal enterprise was being dismantled, brick by painstaking brick. The threat, the pervasive, terrifying threat that had shaped their lives and kept them separated for 5 years, was over. A profound silence fell over the secure property, broken only by the soft sounds of Marco's breathing from the next room, a gentle, rhythmic reminder of a life they had fought so hard to protect. A wave of exhaustion and overwhelming relief washed over Julian and Isabella, so powerful it left them weak, trembling, collapsing into each other's arms. They held each other tightly, tears of gratitude, pain, and sheer exhaustion streaming down their faces. They had faced the darkness, endured the fear, survived the impossible, and they had emerged together, stronger, forever changed. The nightmare was finally over. The long, agonizing ordeal had reached its end. The aftermath of Victor Moreau's arrest was a media firestorm that dominated headlines for weeks, then months, then became the subject of documentaries and books. The scale of his criminal activities, the The chilling details of the threats against Julian Thorne and his family, the intersection of corporate power and organized crime on such a vast scale. It captivated the public's attention and exposed a hidden world of depravity. Julian and Isabella, along with Marcus Thorne, were thrust into the spotlight, navigating a relentless barrage of interviews, press conferences, and intense public scrutiny. Isabella, with quiet strength, unwavering dignity, and remarkable composure, spoke publicly about the fear she had lived with, the sacrifices she had made to protect her son, and the importance of standing up to intimidation and abuse of power, regardless of how powerful the aggressor. She became a reluctant public figure, admired for her resilience, her bravery, and her unwavering devotion to her child. Her story resonated deeply with countless others who had faced intimidation, harassment, or fear at the hands of powerful individuals or organizations, giving a voice to those who had previously suffered in silence. Life at the secure estate continued for a while longer, providing a necessary buffer zone, allowing them to process the trauma, cooperate fully with the ongoing legal proceedings against Moreau and his network, and adjust to their new reality away from the immediate glare of the media and any potential lingering threats from Moreau's remaining associates. The legal battles were complex, protracted, and intensely publicized, stretching over many months, with Moreau and his highly paid legal team attempting to evade justice through every legal maneuver possible. Julian's formidable legal team, working closely with the government prosecutors and utilizing the extensive evidence compiled by Marcus's team, including Isabella's powerful and courageous testimony, meticulously presented the overwhelming case against Moreau. Victor Moreau and many of his key associates were eventually found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to long prison terms. A measure of justice finally served, a sense of closure after years of fear. As the legal dust began to settle and the immediate threat dissipated with Moreau and his network behind bars, Julian and Isabella began the complex, delicate, and ongoing process of building a life together, one that blended their two very different worlds and acknowledged the profound trauma they had endured individually and together. Isabella was still understandably wary of the high-profile nature of Julian's life, the constant attention, the potential for future threats, even with Moreau in prison, knowing that power and wealth could still attract dangerous individuals. Julian understood her reservations completely. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating danger his world could bring. They decided against returning to the high-profile existence of the Manhattan penthouse full-time. It felt too exposed, too much a symbol of the world that had brought such danger to their doorstep. Instead, they purchased a beautiful, sprawling, and highly private estate in the countryside upstate, several hours from the city, a place that offered not only enhanced security and seclusion, but also ample space for Marco to grow, explore, and have a semblance of a normal childhood, surrounded by nature and quiet. The property included dedicated spaces for Leo's activities, extensive gardens, and, crucially, a large, sunlit studio for Isabella to return to her art, her passion, a vital part of her identity that had been suppressed for 5 long years by fear and the demands of survival. It became their primary residence, their sanctuary, a place where they could build their family life away from the constant scrutiny of the city and the shadows of the past. Julian also maintained a smaller, discreet, but still secure apartment in the city for when his work required him to be there, ensuring he could balance his professional life with his family commitments without compromising their safety or privacy. Julian's priorities had undergone a fundamental, irreversible, and profound shift. He was still a powerful figure in the business world, leading Thorne Enterprises, navigating complex deals and strategic decisions. But his focus, his drive, his ultimate purpose was now firmly, undeniably centered on his family. He delegated more responsibilities at Thorne Enterprises, empowering his executive team and creating a healthier work-life balance that allowed him to be fully present for Isabella and Marco. He became a vocal and passionate advocate for victims of corporate crime, extortion, and intimidation, using his immense influence, his vast resources, and his personal story to support organizations that help those targeted by ruthless individuals like Victor Moreau, establishing a foundation dedicated to fighting such crimes. His public image began to evolve, softening from the image of a purely ruthless, solitary titan of industry to one of a devoted father, a loving partner, and a man committed to using his power and resources for good, a transformation that resonated deeply with the public and earned him a new kind of respect. Isabella, finally free from the constant shadow of fear and the immense burden of her secret, returned to her art with renewed passion, purpose, and a newfound depth that captivated critics and collectors alike. Her work, now infused with the raw emotion, resilience, and complex beauty of her experiences, the fear, the isolation, the unwavering love for her son, the journey towards healing, became deeply personal, powerful, and incredibly moving. She held successful exhibitions, her art resonating with audiences on a profound level, sharing her story not just through words but through color, form, and texture. She created a beautiful, dedicated studio at their new home, a space for healing, creativity, and self-expression. She became actively involved in local community initiatives, particularly those supporting single mothers, families who had faced adversity, and art therapy programs for children and adults who had experienced trauma, building a community for herself and Marco outside of Julian's corporate world. Their relationship continued to grow and deepen, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and resilience forged in the intense crucible of shared trauma and adversity. The scars of the past remained, the memories of fear, separation, and the pain they had caused each other. But they faced them together, communicating openly, honestly, and with vulnerability, supporting each other through the ongoing process of healing and rebuilding trust, a process that took time and effort. It wasn't a flawless, effortless romance straight out of a fairy tale. It was real, complex, and built on a foundation of shared trauma, a deep understanding of each other's vulnerabilities and strengths, and an unwavering, absolute commitment to their family. They had difficult conversations, navigated moments of doubt and fear, and sometimes struggled with the lingering shadows of the past, but they did so together, stronger for what they had endured, their bond forged in fire. Marco thrived in their new life. He was a happy, well-adjusted child, secure in the love of both his parents, adapting remarkably well to the changes in his life and the presence of his father. He adored Julian, and the powerful, undeniable bond they had forged during the tense time at the secure estate only deepened with time, shared experiences, and the simple, everyday moments of family life. Bedtime stories read by his father, weekend outings to local parks, shared meals, learning to ride his bike with Julian running alongside him, scraped knees and all. He never fully comprehended the darkness they had faced, the extent of the danger that had loomed over his young life. But he understood that he was loved deeply and unconditionally by both his parents, that his family was strong, and that they were together, finally safe. The billionaire who thought she'd moved on had found her again. Not just the vibrant artist he had loved years ago, but a stronger, more resilient woman who had faced down fear, endured unimaginable hardship, and built a life out of nothing to protect their son. And in finding her, he had found the son he never knew he had, the living embodiment of their intertwined past, their complex present, and their shared, hopeful future. Their journey had been long, arduous, fraught with pain, fear, separation, and a relentless pursuit of truth and justice. It had taken them through the darkest corners of corporate greed and the deepest vulnerabilities of the human heart. But it had led them back to each other, not unscathed, but stronger, more resilient, and with a family forged in the crucible of shared danger and unwavering love. Julian Thorne had learned that the greatest wealth wasn't in the empires he built, the deals he closed, or the fortune he amassed, but in the quiet moments with his son, the unwavering love and strength of the woman by his side, and the enduring, unyielding truth that love, when faced with even the greatest threat, could not be extinguished. Their story was a testament to resilience, sacrifice, the power of truth, the long, difficult road to healing, and the unbreakable strength of family. Thank you for listening to this extensively expanded and detailed narrative. If you were captivated by Julian and Isabella's thrilling and emotional journey of love, loss, danger, and ultimately, redemption and the building of a strong family, please consider subscribing to our channel for more compelling stories.